I want to thank you, the organizer of this Congress, for the invitation, and also to the President and the Secretary of the Pontifical Committee of Historical Science. The topic of my contribution is African Computus around Pseudo-Cyprian's De Pascha Computus. That means that now we have to go back to the 3rd century and to try to understand how they calculated the date of the Pascha. Was not a simple thing, was very difficult, and we have also to take in mind that the problem of time is not only a chronological topic, but it also an exegetical topic, a sacred topic. Not only, we don't need our clock, we need to read the Bible to think the time, the creation, and so on. Now I go to my paper. The work De Pascha Computus is an Easter Computus written in the 5th year of the Emperor Gordian. That means in 243 by an anonymous author who probably came from Africa, as can be inferred from the biblical quotation he used. Although the author remains unknown, he is thought to have been a Novatianist. The importance of this text lies in the fact that it is the oldest known literary source on Easter cycle. In this sense, the Computus made a considerable contribution to the study of the Easter computation, basing it on a 16-year cycle, as can be seen both from the text and from the table attached at the end of the reading. It should be noted that calculating the date of Easter was particularly difficult because both the solar and the lunar years had to be taken into account. Given this, according to the lunar calendar, Easter falls on a fixed day. That means the Sunday following the spring full moon, while in the solar calendar, the date is variable because the lunar year is approximately 11 days and 6 hours shorter than the solar year. Now, in order to shift the difference in length between the solar and lunar years indefinitely, a month was added to the lunar year at regular intervals, the so-called embolism, or intercalary year. And this required the composition of tables or charts that allowed for its calculation and identifications. In this regard, the computist intended to correct the calculations made by his predecessors, among whom some scholars have identified the enigmatic Hippolytus, author of an Apodexis Chronou to Pascha, whose Easter table has come down to us engraved on a stone slab placed at the base of the statue assembled in 1551 and visible today at the entrance to the Vatican Apostolic Library. This calculation is based on a 16 years cycle, just like our computist, starting from the year 222 and continuing for 112 years until the year 324. Others, however, believe that it's not possible to identify who this antecessor, or in Latin, antecessores, were, nor to think that it was Hippolytus. That said, the purpose of this work, is to reveal the mysteries hidden beneath the biblical calendar. Thus, the author, rather than relying on astronomical calculations, draws on biblical teachings to propose his correction of the calculations of previous Computus. Now I go to the content of this treatise. The work consists of 23 short chapters or paragraphs. In the first, the author sets out the purpose of his work, which is to identify the first day of the first month of the year on which the Jews were required to celebrate Passover on 14th day of the moon. Because Christians, I quote, can never stray from the path of the truth and, so to speak, by ignoring what day Easter is, they cannot follow the Jews like blind and foolish people, beginning under God's guidance to indicate not only the first day on which the lamb was killed in Egypt, but also to establish the day of the future Easter for Jews and Christians. End of the quotation. Therefore, in the light of this text, it seems that until then, Christians in the West had followed the Jews in determining the date of the 14th moon, even though Easter was celebrated on Sunday following the 14th moon. The Computus then quotes the book of Exodus chapter 12. At this point, a real exegetical examination begins, according to which the Jewish Passover, narrated in Exodus 12, is the typos of Christ's Passion. In fact, the Jewish Passover is celebrated secundum imaginem, while the Christian is celebrated secundum veritatem. In this regard, we note that the author's exegetical approach is based on a typological allegory, according to which events and characters in the Old Testament are typoi, or figure, of the events and characters in the New Testaments. Returning to the text, the Computus addresses the question from afar, that is, from the creation of the world, and states that the first day of creation, when God distinguished light from darkness, fell on the 8th day before the calends of April. That means 25th of March, from which some Computists, I quote in Latin, aliqui ex nobis, establish that the first month of the year, counting 11 days before the 25th of March, arriving to the Ides, Ed in Latin, of March, that is 15th of March, and 19 days later arriving to the Ides of April, that is the 13th of April. However, the Computus considers the calculation to be wrong, because if the first day of creation fell on the 25th of March, and God created the moon at the fourth day, that means the 28th of March, given that God created the full moon, that means the 14th moon, subtracting 11 days would have resulted in 17th of March, and adding 19 would have resulted in 15th of April. And now, from the Ides of March to the Ides of April, hence the error of the computist. You see that it's not easy to follow this calculation. But the author wants to say that his predecessors were wrong, and their mistake was that they calculated the date 2 days before. This is the topic. The Computus then offers a calculation of Easter using the table he has compiled, referring to the lines as he counts the dates of Easter up to Jesus Christ, who would have celebrated Easter with his disciples. 15 and 79 years after the first Easter, that is, of the Exodus. In paragraph 10, we have an example of a typological and numerological exegesis. The Computus mentions the sacrifice of Isaac, which foreshadows that of Christ on the cross, and then interprets, in a Christological sense, Abraham's battle to free his nephew Lot from the hands of the kings of the Chaldeans and Persians who had invaded Sodom. On that occasion, Abraham counted 318 servants, which the Computus interprets as follows: 100 as the years of Abraham, which multiplied by 3 make 300, which in Greek is marked with the letter tau, the sign of the cross, and 18, which in Greek is marked by the letters IOTA, 10, and ITA, 8. That means the initials of the name of Jesus. This exegesis of the Old Testament continues throughout the world with the intention of counting the years from the first Passover to that of Christ, giving the events and characters of the Old Testament's Christological meaning. In particular, we would like to point out paragraphs 13 to 18, that means the central part of the work, which contains the exegesis of the book of Daniel, chapter 9, where the 70 weeks are discussed. I quote, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgressions, to make an end of the sins, to atone for the iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Holy of the Holies. In particular, paragraph 15 deals with the 7 and the 62 weeks. For the Computus, the 7 weeks contain 49 years, which include the 46 years that refer to the years spent rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, to which are added another 3 years signifying the passions and the resurrection of Christ. Then, at the end of the 16th paragraph, we read, I quote, "And then it was shown that the square, the temple, the surrounding wall, and the city were all completed and protected after 49 years. And all this work was accomplished as a prefiguration of the church. In truth, we have..." End of the quotation. In truth, we are faced with an exegesis that recurs in the majority of Christian exegetes who refer the prophetic text that mention Jerusalem to the church. The Computus ventures further and further in this type of numerological exegesis and asserts that if the number 18, which signifies the name of Christ, is subtracted from the number 49, the remaining 31 coincide with the years of Christ. Therefore, these numbers conceal a Christological and ecclesiological meaning which the Computus wish to highlight. This number can also be explained by the eternal torment reserved for those who do not believe or for who persecute the servants of God, because 49 was the 8 in cubits of the flame of the furnace into which King Nabucodonosor had Ananias, Azarias, and Misael thrown, according to the account of Daniel in the chapter 3. The author then goes on to interpret the 62 weeks, which indicates the 434 years. That means the sign of the cross, the time of passion, and the third day of resurrection. In this sense, the author breaks down the number 434 into 100, which is the age of Abraham when Isaac, the figure of Christ, was born, then 300, which indicates the cross as the sign of the Greek tau, plus 31, the years of Christ, and the 3 days leading up to the resurrection. Moving on to the birth of Christ, the Computus places it on the 5th day before the calends of April. That means the 28th of March, which is the same day of the creation of the sun, corresponding to the 4th day of creation, which began on the 25th March. And so, the author offers once again a Christological interpretation of the solar year consisting of 365 and a quarter days, arriving at 4 evangelists and the 12 apostles through the symbolism of the seasons and the months. Now, now I go to the themes and then to some conclusions. As mentioned above, the Computus wanted to correct the calculation of 14th moon, which some of his predecessors had identified as the day of the creation. That means the 25th March, and which should instead have been placed on the 4th day of the creation. That means the 28th of March, the 5th day before the calends of April. Consequently, for him, the Novus Mensis extended from the 17th of March to the 15th of April, and not from the Ides of March to the Ides of April. Another theme of the work is to reveal the mysteries hidden in the biblical calendar through the symbolic interpretation of numbers and the typological exegesis of the Old Testament, according to which the Jewish Passover is a figure of the true Passover. Isaac is a figure of Christ. The square, the temple, the city, walls, and the rebuilt city are symbols of the church, and so on. In addition, the Judeo-Christian elements present in the work have been highlighted, such as the 318 servants of Abraham, and so on. Now, I go to some concluding suggestions. The author of the Computus considers his explanatory calculation to be of a divinely inspired circle, which had unfolded uninterruptedly throughout the entire history of salvation, from creation to the crucifixion of Christ and up to his own day, and clearly expects readers to accept and to recognize it as true. In this sense, he does not wish to unify the costumes of different churches, nor to eradicate heresies, but rather to establish the truth and avoid errors in the calculation of Easter. In fact, in the treatise, we do not find any mention of heresies or schism in the church because of the date of Easter, but rather a clearly distancing from Jews and their practices, so that this calculation seems to be an invitation to Christians to dissociate themselves from Jews and not an accusation against the Quartodecimans. In this regard, it has been noted that in the treatise, the controversy over the day of Easter is extremely mild. Rather, the criticism is directed at those who in their calculation anticipated Easter by 2 days because of a calculation error, and not because they constituted a schismatic community or separate church. In this sense, it can be said that the difference of opinion or calculation regarding the date of Easter was not considered in this text at this moment a cause of schism. Moreover, the Easter tables were drawn up by private Christians, so they had to be different and were not imposed by any authority. And in conclusion, we recall that these Easter calculations of the early decades of the 3rd century were replaced by a more accurate 84-year cycle, the most important, which is the so-called Supputatio Romana, which was in use in Rome from the middle of the 4th to the middle of the 5th century. It should also be noted that we do not find in this treatise the demands that emerged at the Council of Nicaea, that means to eliminate the differences between the churches and to standardize the date of Easter. Because in that historical period, the differences were attributed to calculation errors rather than to theological or political religious diversifications. Thank you so much.